Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be talking about Confederate Independence Timeline, Episode 5. Today we're going to be taking a look at the years from 1945 to 1965. So let's take a look. We started off with in 1945 with the Union President Thomas Dewey, Confederate President John Garner, and UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who meet with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin in Moscow. We start off with that. The Confederacy import 88 Nazi scientists within the country. This is what the America did, but this time it's the South that's doing it. I guess I can guarantee you can guess what's happening. And the U.S. and the CSA both enter the United Nations, so that's still a thing. We also have the 1945 Confederate election. Democrat President John Garner defeats Whig General Douglas MacArthur. This is Garner's general. Essentially, there will be, I would imagine, articles saying that Garner holds no hard feelings against MacArthur for running against him. He would do the same in his shoes, so there's really no bad blood between the two. But Garner would still win. Very popular president John Garner is. If I had to put an approval on him, I'd say 66 to 68. But he wins 152 to 70 to win re-election. In 1846, President Dewey grants independence to the Philippines, so that happens. The U.S. and CSA passed their own versions of the Atomic Energy Act of 1946. And India Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru fails to convince Dewey, Garner, and Stalin to cease nuclear testing. He comes close with Dewey, but it fails when Dewey realizes Garner and Stalin isn't going to. So his pride. 1947, the U.S. and CSA pass their own version of the National Security Act in 1947, and the Second Red Scare begins across the nation or nations. In 1948, election year for the Union. President Garner signs the Marshall Plan, which is aid to other countries after World War II. The U.S. and CSA recognize Israel as a country. And the election, Republican President Thomas Dewey, not very popular. If I had to put an approval on him, I'd say 42%. But at the same time, the economy is pretty stagnant. It's not dropping, but it's not increasing, and people need it to increase. But Republican President Thomas Dewey is running against Progressive Commissioner Paul McNutt, love the name, and States' Rights Congressman James Roe.
Roe versus Wade.
And the vote splitting between McNutt and Roe is enough to end their chances of winning, and Thomas Dewey, with his 41% approval, wins the election, 193 to 123 to 4. James Roe wins the state of North Dakota, barely. That's the most contested state. But Dewey loses the popular vote to McNutt by roughly 2 percentage points. In 1949, President Garner unveils the Fair Deal Program. Also, the Japanese surrenders to the Confederacy, officially ending World War II. So, Operation Downfall, if I'm getting the name correct, it took a little longer than what it was in real time. And the North Atlantic Treaty is signed within the Union States of America, creating NATO. 1950, President Garner orders the development of the atomic bomb. That's great. And President Garner sends troops to Korea, beginning the Korean War. It's more so he's sending them to South Korea, to make things specific. And President Dewey passes the Defense Production Act, which increases spending towards all branches of the military. 1951, Democrat Vice President Harry Truman defeats Whig Governor Earl Warren, 118 to 116, to become the 14th Confederate President. A close election. Earl Warren back at it for a second time. This time he's the Governor of California. Again, this is Southern California, not Jefferson. And Harry Truman, Garner's vice president, runs. Very milquetoast Truman is, but he was still able to win from Garner's endorsement. So there you go. 1952, the Confederate Senate confirms peace treaty with Japan. Good. President Dewey resumes nuclear testing. Oh yeah. He halted it for a little bit, and now it's back. And we also had the 1952 election. The Republicans nominated Ohio Senator Robert Taft, who, I'm going to say he was the son of Supreme Court Justice, or the former Supreme Court Justice of William Taft, so he's got some name recognition behind him. And he's running up against Progressive Senator Hubert Humphrey, who is running on the far left side of the whole thing, because the Progressive is far left. And the States' Rights is the center left, and they nominated the Undersecretary under, I'm going to say, Wallace. He was the Undersecretary to one of the departments under the Wallace administration, W. Averell Harriman, and Robert Taft wins 146 to 127 to 45 to become the 33rd president. And Harriman was, you would think that there was a lot of vote splitting here, but no, Harriman only campaigned within his state of New York, hoping to deadlock the election, because at this point in the midterms, the states' rights gained a majority in the House. Yeah, they did. And they were very forced to be reckoned with. They were. And he was hoping that he would deadlock the election, as New York was the biggest state at the time, with 45 electoral votes. He was hoping to deadlock it, but no, Taft just has a more of a rural appeal than Humphrey does. So Taft won by big margins. In 1953, the Confederacy finishes production of the hydrogen bomb, and President Truman fired Douglas MacArthur over the use of it. So that would happen in this time. 1954, President Taft brings the economy back up to where it was before World War II. So the economy is back up where it needs to be. Or, well, to Great Depression levels, I guess you could say. Things are still pretty bad for the Union, but it's getting better at least. 1955, President Taft sends troops to South Vietnam. Again, just imagine Vietnam in real life, but this time, just the North. And the 1956 Union election is happening, and President Robert Taft is running for re-election, and he's running up against, I think, South Dakota, it could be wrong, the South Dakota senator from the Unity Party, which is the unity party from the Progressive and States' Rights Party. They have come to join forces and have chosen Frank Losh as their nominee, and they still lose 219 to 100. But the popular vote is oh so close, as Taft only won about 1%, so it's very close. In the 1957, a KKK revival occurs in the South, which is very unpopular with the Whig Party, very unpopular. And certain members of the Democrat Party, Harry Truman has not sided with the KKK. He's actually denounced them. But Whig General Dwight Eisenhower ends up running and says, yeah, you're not handling Korea right. I'm going to handle it. Just step aside. And Whig General Dwight D. Eisenhower defeats Democrat President Harry Truman 123 to 110 to become the 15th Confederate president. I'm going to put a number on Truman, 48 to 50% approval, just going to say that now. But Dwight Eisenhower wins pretty big, winning states such as Texas that usually don't go Whig. In 1958, the President Eisenhower ends the Korean War. He withdraws troops, a campaign promise. He would try to negotiate peace, and he does. And President Taft signs the Alaskan Statehood Act, which would give Alaska statehood within the Union. The UK, the Union States, the Confederate States, and the USSR agree to end all nuclear testing for 3 years. 3 years. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty is signed. Just look it up. It's just a weird thing where Antarctica is just is not owned by any of the countries. It's more of a testing facility than it is anything else. In 1960, the next election is running up the margins, and before we get into the election, President Taft would increase military presence in Vietnam. There you go. But the 1960 election is happening, and Unity Senator from Massachusetts, John Kennedy, would be running up against the U.S. ambassador under the Taft administration, Henry Lodge Jr. And it's a very close election, but JFK wins 182 to 140, and he becomes the 34th Union president. He becomes the 34th president. Congratulations. In 1961, the Confederacy severs relationships with China, which scares a lot of people. But the U.S. establishes the Peace Corps like Kennedy does in real life. President Eisenhower ratifies the 18th Amendment to the Confederate Constitution, which is voting rights for the District of Columbia, or the Dixieland of Washington, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. Also, President Eisenhower declares this in his State of the Union address. He says the KKK should be abolished from this great Confederacy, and essentially starts a kind of like a mini civil war within the Confederacy amongst the KKK and people who oppose them. It's nothing too major. It's just like arrest them, get them out of this country. They're a terrorist group, something like that. In 1962, tensions between the Union President Kennedy and Confederate Senator Fidel Castro increase. So, in this timeline, Fidel Castro is a senator from Cuba, is a senator from the Confederacy under the state of Cuba, and his fellow senator is Che Guevara. I thought that was something interesting I could do. And President Kennedy would declare a moon race in his State of the Union address. And the Confederate missile crisis occurred, where the U.S. and USSR are frightened over Senator Castro's call for a nuclear armament in the Confederacy, which President Eisenhower would have to meet with the leaders and just say, it's fine, he's not in my administration, he has no say. So he just says, just chill out. The 1963 election year, and we got some things. Mississippi Whig Senator Martin Luther King Jr. becomes President Eisenhower's new running mate. Popularity has risen amongst Senator King, and he wants him in his administration one way. And zip codes are introduced in both the Union and Confederacy. Martin Luther King Jr. gives his I Have a Dream speech, where he's talking about I have a dream where everyone is equal. Kind of a bit different, like with Booker T. Washington's speech, but same premise. Also some bad news. Union President John Kennedy is assassinated by anti-Union Confederates. So it's one of two things can happen here. You can say that they are you can say they're Confederates from Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and Virginia, and they came in to assassinate John Kennedy because they hate the Union. They despise. So they want to assassinate the president to make a point known. Or you could say that these are Union people who want to join the Confederacy and will assassinate Kennedy to do so. It's up to you. Vice President Hubert Humphrey would become the 35th President of the Union. So Hubert Humphrey was Kennedy's running mate, and he is now President. There you go. But now we have the 1963 Confederate election, where Whig President Dwight D. Eisenhower will be facing off against Democratic Senator and the Majority Leader for Democrats, Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson is more of a return to normalcy. He is a Democrat who supports the KKK in this timeline. He's like, yeah, these are fine people. Okay, they have a right to petition. They have a right to assembly. Okay, they just want things to go back to normal. And he would say a bunch of racist stuff that I'm not going to say, but it's implied. But Whig President Dwight D. Eisenhower would defeat Democrat Senator Lyndon B. Johnson 133 to 103 to win re-election. So Eisenhower would defeat Johnson. And another election year, this time for the Union, the U.S. economy begins to slowly drop under President Humphrey. Yep, not good. Nope, not good. But he does ratify the 24th Amendment, which is a poll tax ban, since as the minorities were calling for it, and Humphrey's like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And yet again, he has a far left presidency, and even some unity politicians in the Senate and House are going against him. And there are even calls for impeachment, but they never pan out. But Republicans nominate a congressman, I think Oregon, I could be wrong, but William A. Miller, wins the nominations, and he begins the Poor Man's Revolution, which is a political revolution. For now. Well, did you hear that? But William Miller wins in a ginormous landslide, winning the popular vote by 10 points, defeating Humphrey, the likes of which of Ronald Reagan, where the only state Miller loses is Minnesota. Miller wins 307 to 10 to become the 36th Union president, beginning of the Poor Man's Revolution. Essentially a signs of, hey, we are getting out of this freaking depression one way or another. In 1965, wait, what? Yeah, 1965, President Miller proclaims the Great Society. Essentially kind of like FDR's New Deal, but for poor people. I haven't thought too much into it. More of this will happen in the next episode. But President Miller signs the Social Security Act of 1967, which is Medicare and Medicaid. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.